Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon. When someone becomes too central to any field of human experience, it is very common for a thick fog of myth to form around him. Francisco Tárrega, whose birthday is this month, is that figure in the history of guitar. He's close enough to us that the chain of the degrees of separation is not broken. I study with someone who studied with someone who studied with him. But he's at the same time distant enough that one can use their imagination to create a saint. I've often heard that he was the greatest guitarist of all time. But how can we know? This is Carlotta Daglia playing Capriccio Arabe by Tárrega, a release from Guitar Co-op, which you can hear in the playlist that we have prepared to accompany this episode, and you can access it in the description. Much of what we know about Tárrega comes from students and relatives. These are usually not the most reliable biographers because there's always a bias, a tendency to sanctify the subject. Especially the best-known biography by Emilio Pujol goes down this path. But let's be more kind than severe. It is good that these narratives exist as they inspire more people to listen to Tárrega's music. So let's go. Francisco de Asís Tárrega y Eichea. He was born on November 21st, 1852 in Villarreal, in the province of Castellón, Valencian community in Spain. Even today, it is only 5,000 people strong. Apart from Tárrega, the most notable thing about the city is a football team that always performs pretty well in the Champions League. In Tárrega's time, it was certainly a sleepy and impoverished city. His father worked as a watchman in a convent and played flamenco guitar in his spare time. According to traditional accounts, he learned on his own, imitating his father. This is Maestro Antonio Guedes playing Alborada by Francisco Tárrega. Very young, he escaped from his nanny and fell into an irrigation canal, injuring his eyes. We don't know the real severity, but his father was afraid that he would lose his sight and moved to the neighboring Castellón, where he began taking music lessons. This way he followed a very Spanish tradition of giving musical instruction to blind people. In fact, he learned music from two blind teachers. Carlotta Dahlia playing Prelude in D by Tárrega. When he was 10 years old, the concert guitarist Julián Arcas played in Castellón and heard him. He was very impressed and advised his father to send him to Barcelona to study with him. His father agreed, provided he also studied the piano, an instrument of greater social standing. Arcas spent a lot of time traveling. Tárrega, according to the narrative, ran away to earn a living playing piano in cafes. His father rescued him and took him home. The fact is that the extremely humble family did what was within their means to give the boy a musical education. Antonio Guedes playing Sueño, a tremolo study by Tárrega, which you can hear in the playlist accompanying this episode. He had a knack for running away because at 13 he ran away again, this time to Valencia, which was already a large town, where he joined a Romani family. His father went again there, brought him back home, and he began playing the guitar and piano in Castellón to contribute to the household budget. This is Valmor Boza playing Grand Valse by Tárrega, which many people know as the Nokia tune, as the cell phone company chose this tune to be their official tone ring melody. At 22, he finally moved to Madrid to study at the Royal Conservatory, this time with expenses paid by a benefactor, which was a constant in his life, by the way. Since there was no guitar course, he studied composition there with the great composer Arrieta, an operetta composer, who persuaded him to focus on the guitar and leave the piano aside. At that time, he was already playing a Torres guitar, which he had bought in Sevilla. This duo, Tárrega and Torres, would have a tremendous impact in the guitar history. Torres is the luthier who established the dimensions and the present design of the modern guitar. Most guitars made in the 20th century were based on the Torres model. Thus, not only Tárrega is the first modern concert performer on the guitar, but he also played an instrument that is the first truly modern guitar. This is Wulfing Liske playing Sueño Mazurka by Tárrega on an original instrument, a Torres guitar that belonged to Tárrega himself. Now approaching 30, Tárrega began giving concerts around Spain and teaching. He seems to have had an unusual aptitude for inspiring his students, and soon the best lined up to study with him: Miguel Llobet, Emilio Pujol, Daniel Fortea, Josefina Robledo, who would become the very best Spanish guitarists of their time. Around that time, he also began to compose. This is Julian Bream playing Prelude No. 2 by Francisco Tárrega. Tárrega, the composer, is a very, very particular case. He was, in fact, an occasional composer. He shines better for the power and significance of some of his main works than for having an extensive or extremely high-quality body of work. This is me, Fabio Zanon, playing Estudio Brillante, which is based on a violin study by Allard by Francisco Tárrega, which you can hear in the playlist that we have very carefully prepared for you to hear all these pieces in their entirety. Embarrassingly, there is still no complete catalog and critical edition of all of Tárrega's works. It is estimated that he left about 100 solo pieces. Some of them are short preludes and studies, less than a minute long, and others are adaptations of excerpts from works by other composers. His complete solo works fill little more than 2 CDs. However, the statistics don't lie. There is a guide to guitar recordings compiled by Henrique that shows that out of the 10 most recorded guitar pieces ever, 4 are by Tárrega, including numbers 1 and 2, Recuerdos de la Alhambra and Capricho Árabe. The other 2 are Lágrima and Adelita. This is Antonio Guedes playing Adelita. It's worth remembering that the guitar in the last decades of the 19th century was in a very precarious situation within the musical landscape. Tárrega attempts to bring to the guitar an image of power, of capacity to handle works of greater artistic density. His strategy was to invest on his experience as a pianist and transcribe them for the guitar. From the last decade onwards, these works began to predominate in his concerts and create surprises of critical reception. That's when he began to operate a turning point in guitar history, because this format would be adopted by the following generation, which definitely placed the guitar within the broader musical landscape. His transcriptions range from Bach to Wagner, passing through Beethoven, Chopin, Mendelssohn, and Schumann. Some of these are astonishing for their intuition in giving form to works on the guitar that at first glance would seem totally unpromising. That is the case of Mendelssohn's Canzonetta, originally from his string quartet Opus 12. This is Julian Bream playing Mendelssohn Canzonetta in Tárrega's transcription. But it is in his Spanish works that he ended up creating a model for how to write classical music with a Spanish flavor for the classical guitar, without necessarily copying flamenco guitar language. His versions of piano works by Albéniz, Malats, and scenes from zarzuelas are exemplary. They almost seem to give back to the guitar what is rightfully their own. In a way, the generation of composers who wrote original works for the guitar decades later, such as Torroba, Turina, or Rodrigo, take as their starting point the brilliant writing of Tárrega's transcriptions. This is Marcelo Caiath playing Albeni's Sevilla, transcribed by Francisco Tárrega, which you can listen to in our playlist. Just access that in our description. But I will talk more about Tárrega's works later. For now, let's follow the evolution of his musical and personal life. In 1881, he also began to play outside of Spain. He played at the Lyon Opera and at the Odeon in Paris, in homage to the bicentenary of Calderón de la Barca. Tárrega's life and work are fertile ground for sowing legend. For example, when he played in London, it became apparent that he didn't quite like the place. After the concerts, people asked why he was looking so melancholy. His answer was said to be to compose the prelude Lágrima, tear. If it is not true, it's a great invention. This is Carlotta Dalia playing Lágrima, Tear by Francisco Tárrega, a release by GuitarCoop. In reality, Tárrega seemed to miss his fiancée, Maria José Risso, daughter of another benefactor. They married as soon as he returned to Spain. Together, they would have 3 children. The family went to live in Madrid, where he continued his pattern of teaching and traveling for concerts. But after his eldest daughter died as a child, they went to live in Barcelona. The city was bustling at that time, and some of his friends included Albéniz, Granados, Malats, and Pablo Casals. He continued traveling for concerts throughout the 1880s, but from 1890 to 1903, he only traveled in Spain. This is Narciso Yepes playing La Mariposa by Tárrega. I don't think you even need to invent anecdotes to make Tárrega's life interesting. One unusual association was with the English doctor, Walter Lecky. Lecky had a very adventurous life. After graduating as a doctor, he went to work on a ship, traveling extensively through Africa and the Middle East. Then he worked for the Chilean army. He began speculating in mining and became a millionaire. This allowed him to no longer depend on work and dedicate himself to being a bon vivant, very vain and talkative who played guitar and billiards. And in London, he first studied the guitar with Madame Sidney Pratt, a pioneer. But living in the south of France, he met Tárrega and began taking lessons with him. It's bizarre to note that many of Tárrega's manuscripts that remained in Lecky's possession are now in the Guitar Museum in Brighton. They contain annotations that seem to be addressed to a complete beginner. Even in highly difficult works like Malat's Spanish Serenade, he even writes the place of each finger to find the notes. I mean, this is quite bizarre. That's me, Fabio Zanon, playing Joaquin Malat's Spanish Serenade that you can listen to in our playlist, because this is also a Guitar Co-op recording. Lecky traveled extensively accompanying Tárrega. In 1900, they went to Algeria. Legend has it that, inspired by the obsessive beating of Arab drums, Tárrega composed the Danzamora. This is Antonio Guedes playing Danzamora by Tárrega. One of the most troublesome episodes is Tárrega's association with Doña Concepción Gómez de Jacobi. I can't say if it was out of absolute necessity or simply so that he could have little more financial leeway, but the fact is that Tárrega spent most of his life dependent on favors or on wealthy friends like Lecky, who generously showed him their generosity. Dona Concepción, better known as Conchita, was an admirer, patron, and possibly Tárrega's muse. The problem is that, until recently, what was known about her came from the biography written by one of Tárrega's students, Emilio Pujol, who treated the professor as if he were the father in heaven, and apparently Pujol never met Conchita. This is Mats Bergström playing Isabel by Francisco Tárrega. Recently, the musicologist Dave J. Buch published an article in which he seeks to learn more about this relationship, not only because of gossip, but because it seems to have had effects on Tárrega's work. Doña Conchita was a divorced multimillionaire who met Tárrega in 1896. She attended one of his concerts in Valencia, fainted from emotion, and began to follow him everywhere he gave concerts. In many cases, she even organized those concerts, including in Paris. Pujol portrays Tárrega as a sanctified figure, which was probably true, and Dona Concepción as a vivacious spirit with a strong temperament and exalted imagination, which was also probably true. This is Dave Russell playing Danza Odalisca by Francisco Tárrega. An investigation into this fascinating woman shows that she began her life as a singer, singing zarzuelas, operettas, along with her sister. Critics highly praise her voice and performances. In this capacity, she traveled to Mexico where she met and married a German naturalized Mexican, Luis Jacobi. Jacobi amassed a legendary fortune as a landowner in Mexico and Guatemala, planting coffee, raising cattle, and investing in mining. The family had several residences in both countries as well as in Spain and France. By the way, all those farms are still active. In 1898, they divorced and Concepcion returned to Spain. We are listening to José Miguel Moreno playing Paquito by Tárrega, which you should listen to in our playlist. Shortly after fainting, Concepcion invited Tárrega and his family to live in a country house she owned near Barcelona, Torre de San Gervasio, the San Gervasio Tower. They continued to travel together occasionally, but in 1899 they broke off relations and Tárrega returned with his family to his apartment in downtown Barcelona. We don't know exactly what happened, if anything happened between them. The prevailing story is that Tárrega visited the city of Granada in 1899, taken there by Doña Conchita. Together they visited the incredible Alhambra, with its rich Moorish architecture. As evening fell, a suggestive ray of sunshine transformed what was already a beautiful afternoon into something magical, and there he's said to have had the idea to write in a piece of music inspired by this poetic moment. Recuerdos de la Alhambra is one of the key works in guitar repertoire, the most recorded guitar piece ever, and all of us guitarists are used to seeing the score dedicated to Tárrega's French friend, Alfred Cotin. This is John Williams with his beautiful tremolo playing Recuerdos de la Alhambra by Tárrega. It so happens that recently a manuscript of an early version of Recuerdos appeared in a collection in Barcelona. The title is different. Improvisation in Granada, Arabic Song. The dedication reads, "To my excellent disciple, Doña Conchita Garcia de Jacobi, from her master and friend Francisco Tárrega." Dated December 8th, 1899. That is the day of the Immaculate Conception, that is, the name day of Conchitas. At the end of the piece, he also wrote, "Since I cannot offer you a more valuable offering on your Saint's Day, please accept this poor poetic impression that my soul felt before the grandiose marvel of the Alhambra of Granada, which we admire together. This is Professor Antonio Guedes playing Memories of the Alhambra. By the way, I'm partially a guitarist because of this interpretation, because I decided to learn the guitar seriously after I saw Mr. Guedes playing this piece. It is not known exactly what happened, but Tárrega and Conchita broke off relations soon after. Pujol didn't even know Tárrega yet, but he says that she had a domineering and fickle character. Anything could or could not have happened. Tárrega may have rejected her advances, and she may have rejected his advances. And maybe there was no involvement. Or the reason may have been entirely different. At that time, Miguel Llobet was studying with Tárrega and was beginning to attract attention. Conchita also sponsored Llobet, and Tárrega felt betrayed because she took him by hand to Paris. It may have been professional jealousy. Tárrega went on tour with Leckie and wrote Prelude No. 5. The manuscript bears the subtitle, By the Ex-Prisoner of the Devil's Tower. Remember, Tárrega was living in a place called Tower that was owned by Conchita. That completely changes our perception of the atmosphere of this piece. That is me, Fabio Zanon, playing Prelude No. 5 by Tárrega, which you can hear in the playlist that we have prepared for you. They only reconnected in 1907. By that time, Tárrega had already abandoned the stage and was pretty ill. Incidentally, this was not the only work that Tárrega dedicated to her. There is a manuscript of the mazurka Sueño, which is titled Mazurka Conchita. is me, Fabio Zanon, playing Sueño or Mazurka Conchita by Tárrega. The tradition of patronage remained in the family. Conchita's son, Luis, who was also filthy rich, financed the career of the marvelous composer Federico Monpou, who lived in his house in Paris giving piano lessons to Conchita's grandchildren. Tárrega remained in Barcelona. He was a compulsive smoker. Some of his guitars were all marked by cigar embers, and in many of his photos he appears smoking while playing. This must have contributed to his poor health. In 1906, perhaps due to a heart attack, his right arm became paralyzed. He died 3 years later, December 15, 1909, a few days after writing his last work, the Prelude Oremus, based on Schumann. This is the Prelude Oremus, which is an adaptation of Tárrega's from a work by Robert Schumann. It's easy to create a reliquary around Tárrega. We never heard him play. His student Llobet, who was the greatest guitarist at the turn of the 20th century, said that Tárrega was the greatest guitarist he had ever heard. In a way, it's best to keep Tárregas within the realm of our imagination. Everyone commented on the poetic force of his performances, but many also say he was a great improviser, capable of mind-blowing, almost comical virtuosity. Few of his works suggest this, but one of them is the Gran Jota. It's nothing more than a long sequence of variations on the Jota Aragonesa, with a companion of effects such as pizzicato, tambora, military drum, trumpet imitations, left-hand playing solo, etc. Our friend Pablo Sanz Villegas playing Gran Jota by Francisco Tárrega, a long piece that you can hear complete in the playlist that GuitarCoop has prepared for you. It turns out that it's not necessary to rely solely on imagination. In the last years of the 20th century, a recording of Tárrega himself playing appeared in a collection in Barcelona, certainly one of the first, if not the first, recording of solo guitar in history, since it must have been made latest in 1906. The recording technology, of course, was very rudimentary. It was a mechanical recording on a wax cylinder. There was no microphone. The musician had to play as loudly as possible into a tube to ensure that his playing would be heard and recorded on the wax cylinder. It is difficult to say whether this clipped recording of the Gavotte Maria is representative of Tárrega's art or not, but it is a relic. It's an essential historical document that every guitarist should hear many, many times because it gives us many clues about the style of guitar played at the end of the 19th century. This is Tárrega's recording of his own Maria Gavotte, a historical document that you should listen to many times. What seems most remarkable to me about this recording is how restrained and at the same time imaginative it is. In a certain way, it resembles overall, but without copying the details, the recording by Andrés Segovia, who in his teens wanted to study with Tárrega, but barely managed to attend his funeral. Fate would have that in the very month and year Tárrega died, Segovia played his debut recital, age 16, in Granada. In this way, the founding father of the modern guitar passed the baton to the guitarist who defined the 20th century guitar. This is Andrés Segovia playing Gavotte Maria by Francisco Tárrega. As a composer, Tárrega, along with Albéniz, represents the last flowering of a musical current called Alhambra style. This is a branch of musical nationalism inspired by the narratives of romantic travelers such as Byron or Victor Hugo, but above all, by Washington Irving and his book Tales of the Alhambra, which probably inspired the title of Recuerdos de la Alhambra. It's a proposal to revive the Arab cultural component represented by Granada and the Alhambra Palace. All the stereotypes of Spanish music that we have absorbed to this day come from there, Andalusian cadence, melismas, and the use of gypsy scale. Tárrega's other celebrated work is a demonstration of this recipe, the Capriccio Árabe. This is Andrés Segovia playing Capriccio Árabe by Francisco Tárrega, Arabian Caprice. The other component of his work is a somewhat inconclusive character of his short pieces, which seem to nod to the works of Chopin or Schumann very often. His preludes in particular have this kind of enigmatic atmosphere that is unique in the guitar repertoire. We've heard Josefina Robledo, one of Tárrega's own students, playing his prelude number 1. Much is said about the Tárrega school of playing. Tárrega's work consisted of his students and the exercises he wrote for himself or for them. There are no technical writings or a method. It so happens that his students had hundreds of students who saw in the Tárrega school a way to validate their own work, but the instruction they transmit suffered the process of the telephone game with a slight distortion at each stage of transmission. I think there are a few elements we can say with certainty. The adoption of the posture with the guitar raised on a stool and the right arm hanging over the sound hole, which favors the mobility of the right hand. Then, of course, the use of fingerings along the string with the profuse use of portamento and glissando to sustain an uninterrupted singing voice on the guitar. This also favors the preference for the rest stroke or apoyando, when the finger rests on the next string after playing. That increases power and projection and the prominence of the melodic lines. This is Andrés Segovia playing Marieta by Tárrega, a marvelous example of apoyando and singing style that is so much in tune with Tárrega's aesthetics. Much has been said and written about playing without nails as Tárrega's artistic guiding principle. Well, his entire concert career was done with nails. He decided to chop his nails off when he was no longer touring abroad, and his performances were limited to more intimate circles. He saw the fleshy fingertips as the most sensitive part of the body, which would produce the deepest and roundest sound. But the fact is that the 20th century adopted a mixed fingernail and fingertip technique as standard, and Tárrega's theoretical idea was almost abandoned. With few exceptions, such as Manuel Cubedo and Renata Tarragó, I think playing without nails is a possibility to be explored, but one that requires greater sacrifices than playing with nails. This is José Miguel Moreno, a historical performance specialist playing Adelita by Tárrega on an original instrument without nails, so you can hear the difference. My own teacher, Professor Henrique Pinto, analyzed Tárrega's legacy in the preface to his method, Iniciação ao Violão, Introduction to the Guitar. He questions where Tárrega wanted to go by creating this additional difficulty and adopting a heavy technical routine as compensation. He felt that Tárrega attempted to objectively materialize a subjective pursuit of perfection. Whatever the practical result may have been, this pursuit is perhaps the noblest an artist can have, and through it, Tárrega remains a model for us all. I invite you to listen to the playlist that we have very, very carefully prepared for you so we can hear GuitarCoop's recordings and other recommended recordings. I want at this time to thank Henrique Caldas for the technical work for this podcast and to Monique Zakzeski for the general management. And I invite you to listen to the next episode next month. See you there. Bye. Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon.